Thank you so much to those of you who submitted a question in a recent Ask Sarah Anything reach out. We just sent out a message to our entire newsletter community saying thank you so much for your loyal readership. We hope you're enjoying what we're creating. And is there something specific in your world that you would like to ask me about? And so, hot on the heels of that reach out, I have 3 very fascinating and fabulous questions. The first one is, how do you support a coworker who's been diagnosed with something such as autism, ADHD, PTSD when there's no training in the workplace? I have to tell you, I love that you are this empathetic, caring, and kind as a colleague. Do you know the word kind comes from the word kin, which is about really family? So be there, treat this person as if you would treat a family or friend that you deeply care about. And obviously you do, because you're asking this question. So what would you do for a very close friend or your family member? You'd probably do a little bit of reading. You might check in about how they're doing. You might try to, just like intuitively monitor how are they managing? How are they coping? And that's where, your intuition can allow you to check in. I am always talking about how recognition really is the need for people to feel seen, heard, and valued. And when you are looking for signs, when you are reminding them of their greatness, you are noticing very intentionally how you depend on them, how you're grateful for their commitment, their competence, acknowledging and reminding them of the things that you have always appreciated in them, allows them to see that in your eyes, they are still greatness. They are not their label. They are not a disorder. They are not maybe even their struggle and their transition. They are a beautiful whole person to you. And so see them for their greatness. And when you notice it, point it out. And as I say, asking them how they're doing is a way that we show that we recognize and value people. Feel free to ask a follow-up question if that doesn't quite answer what you're looking for. The next question I have is, how do I apply these same principles in a high school classroom? Yes! My husband's a high school teacher, and so we have many conversations at the dinner table about that. When you create a space where peers can have healthy sharing with each other, noticing and acknowledging each other. So, for example, if somebody's doing a presentation, one of the assignments of people listening and paying attention could be identify 3 things you didn't notice before, or 3 aspects of your colleague that you admire and you appreciate. So for somebody, they might say, I learned a lot about this topic of medieval princes. And for somebody else, they're like, wow, I'm impressed with your comfort, and you seem really confident up there. Having people, as rather than just evaluate, which is usually in a school setting, we're focused on evaluating each other academically, but also in terms of the curriculum, the standards. Why not be appreciating as much as we are evaluating? Similarly, because our school system is often the first place in which we ritualize rewards. In other words, when we talk about rewards versus recognition, rewards is extrinsic markers of value. It's what other people expect of you. And it's very transactional. You do your homework, you hand in these assignments, you do really well, I will give you a good grade. Recognition is intrinsic motivation, what we uniquely value and are motivated by. It builds relationship currency. And so how do we nurture both the rewards, get the mark, as well as the recognition? Acknowledge the person's character. Notice the small things as a teacher, as an EA, as a fellow student. Notice the things that are the person that shows up in the classroom. Because really, let's face it, not everybody fits into the mold, right? They may not academically. I was this really steady B student. If I got an A, I had to work really hard at it. And nobody ever really thought I was that smart, but it was a combination of other things, right? I was enthusiastic. I was often like the supporter in the room. I would work really hard. I wasn't the smartest one in the room, but I would work really hard. And so the teachers who saw things in me beyond just a grade, they're the ones I work the hardest for. So if the teachers are asking this question, I'm assuming this is a teacher who asked this question, when you notice the person, regardless of title, and this is true of your colleagues, your fellow teachers and EAs, the secretary and so forth, people need to feel known. And just like that, that beautiful reminder, I think was it Teddy Roosevelt who said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. As a teacher, if you care about your students, they will care about what you know, and they will care to show you what they know as well. If students only show up to perform in order to get into grad school or medical school sure, that's fine. But you know what? We're creating systems of worthiness that are defined by their scholastic performance. And then what ends up happening is we have a whole bunch of people who graduate into these really high performing, high pressure environments. And you know what? They're the most at risk. Their mental health is the most tenuous. It's the doctors, the lawyers, orthodontists, the veterinarians that have a higher rate of suicide than other professions. And I'm sorry to get real dark for a second, but it's true. So we can't create the conditions of worthiness in our academic settings that are only about academics. We have to reinforce the value of the human being who is behind those marks and who will be in those very important roles in society. So teachers, you play a vital role of developing character, acknowledging it, seeing it, and also perhaps reminding students that they are more than their mark. They're more than their performance on the football field. They're more than their musical talent in the stage. They are a whole beautiful human being, and you value and you see the wholeness of who they are. Third question I have here, and keep them coming because I love these questions. How do you provide recognition to all team members when you work in an office, but you don't often work with them side by side? This is a very common question that I would get coming from the not-for-profit and healthcare world initially. 15 years of my career, I basically would help people with rebuilding their team if they were in struggle. I would help leaders who had this massive spans of control. In other words, they managed between 100 and 250 people. So this question around how do you recognize people when you don't see them all the time, when you may not get a chance to work alongside them very often? It's a really good question because there are whole industries that struggle with this. And frankly, most of us do have, even if we have a lot of colleagues, we're not going to work closely with them all the time. So those little tiny glimmers of what they've done, rather than let those pass you by, capture them. Now, you may have systems that allow you to capture this easily. One of the people that I do a lot of speaking for is Bucket List Rewards. They're a SaaS company, software as a service, where they have a virtual platform. Some companies have a virtual platform where you can recognize people. You can use that. Write people a little note. It sounds like the person who's asking this question, you're all physically in an office together, you just don't necessarily see each other. You could write a little note on a post-it note and leave it on their computer or their monitor or on top of their lunch about their greatness. If you're sitting in an office where you kind of hear each other and you're thinking, wow, the way that person handled that really, they handled a difficult situation with a client or a customer really well. You could put in a note that said, I don't know who you were talking to, but wow, that sounded intense. You did an amazing job of staying cool under pressure. Or if you're not as wordy like me, you could just say, cool under pressure, you. I don't know. Something like that. Writing people notes. So if somebody has a milestone, they reach the end of a project, it's obviously if it's a birthday, if you kind of celebrate that sort of thing in your office, but also if you find out it's somebody's, let's say 6 months since they started and they just happen to mention this in conversation, or somebody mentions that it is about, your colleague that is next door, have a bunch of blank cards in your desk and write them a little blank card and say, happy 6-month anniversary. I'm so glad you chose us. Right? How awesome would that be to get an impromptu card like that? So finding ways to create visual systems in your office is another great way to encourage people to not only come out from their desk, but also to be thinking and looking for the greatness that happens all around them. If you don't already have it, create a space where people can write notes, they can share a note, put it on there, they can share successes, maybe even have a metric or two. Like how many signs of greatness did you see over the last week? And have people like use a little thermometer rating. You know how they do that for fundraising? Or what about having a little goal? Let's acknowledge at least 50 people collectively this week, each other, customers, suppliers, and then people can maybe do a quick, let's do a quick gratitude huddle and say, what is something that you're grateful for right now? Everyone shares something and say, and so let's do a quick roundup of all of the recognition that you've given, or you've heard somebody give, and then you track it. Why not have a gratitude huddle? 5 minutes every day. And this is related to a piece of research where they had half of an office environment write about what was their day. And then the other half wrote about, what are you grateful for today? They did this for 6 weeks at 3:00 in the afternoon for 5 minutes. That was the instruction. The second group, the group that wrote about something they were grateful for that day, they had a dramatically reduced difference from the control group in ostracizing behavior, gossiping, and other negatively non-pro-social behaviors. And they weren't even a team in crisis. So imagine how much more abundant that team is by simply focusing on, for 5 minutes a day, something they're grateful for. So build in some of these micro rituals, make it easy, visual spaces, use internal systems if you have them to be able to be recognizing each other's greatness, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed post-it of making somebody's day.